GI Griffin here for another Advisor Insight lecture. Today, the topic is the 5 foundations of sound judgment and decision making. So I want to kind of touch on these, which, you ask, hey, what are the 5 foundations? Well, let's break those down. System thinking, second order effects, motivators, trade-offs, and long-term consequences. So I want to strategically analyze how decisions interact with different complex systems. And I want to explain why so many people and organizations repeatedly make avoidable mistakes and how developing stronger judgment creates a significant long-term competitive advantage. So let's get into it. Something that I think that we can all agree on: the quality of your life and outcomes is largely dependent upon the quality of your decisions. So the decisions that you make will dictate how your life goes. You make good decisions, you have good outcomes. All right, things are working, finances are good, house is good, family, everything's looking good. I made the right choices, the right decisions, right? On the flip side, you don't do that. You make a lot of poor decisions, a lot of bad strategic plays, and you're paying for the consequences of that in multiple areas of your life. So decision making and sound judgment is crucial when it comes to actually making sure that you get the results that you want in your life. Most poor decisions, by the way, they're not caused by a lack of intelligence, right? A lot of intelligent people can make really poor decisions. Instead, it's caused by poor judgment. There's a difference. You can be intelligent and have poor judgment. And the reason for that is because judgment oftentimes will come from either experience or someone else, say like mentorship, which we'll get into later. Many people, they'll focus on the immediate situation that they have going on, but they'll ignore the deeper causes behind those outcomes. They don't bother even investigating into it. They're like, oh, okay, this thing happened. All right. Well, why? Why did it happen? What did you do? What was the premise, or what was the perception that you had that led you to that poor outcome? Can you do anything about it in the future so that you have future outcomes that you want, better results? Is that something that you can do? You have to take a look at it in order to get that. Strengthening judgment requires learning to see beyond the surface level and looking into the why behind things. Why is my favorite question. I love learning, how do things work? Why does it happen this way? What are the causes, right? It's important to be curious about those things because it allows you to understand your world. So let's break down some of the whys, some of the patterns here. Most people, they think in mostly like isolated situations rather than interconnected systems, right? So like the immediate effects are prioritized while second order effects are usually ignored. So people are looking at the present moment. Oh, this looks good. That would feel good. This would feel comfortable, while ignoring the future ramifications that may happen from that, right? And there's lots of reasons. Either they don't know how to do that, they've never been taught, they've never practiced, or it's uncomfortable. They don't want to look and see what their decisions are going to lead to later on down the line. They may be too stressed out and they're like, I can't handle it. Well, that doesn't stop the thing from happening. So you still need to take a look and see, okay, second order decisions. If I do this, what are the outcomes or the possible outcomes that may happen? And the next one is something interesting because it's something that people do, especially if they're more inexperienced, but something that I have found that AI has done or will do. And that is judging human behavior by a person's stated intentions rather than the actual like underlying motivators. So one, people who don't have experience with the fact that people will say things and then do something different, they may not know that. But the interesting thing that I found when I was researching a bit about some things within AI and testing it and even just asking it was that its previous version, and this particular platform, I'm not going to mention it, but its previous version pretty much assumed that what people said was true was true. It didn't account for that people may have motivators to say something that is not true to get an outcome that they want. So you have to pay attention to those motivators, to those incentives. People will do things based on that. It's the underlying why. It's their operating system. Why does a person go and do this thing that does not make sense, that will hurt themselves or hurt others, despite the fact there being another option or a better solution? Well, they may be feeling a certain way and they can't regulate their emotions. That leads them to make poor decisions. A lot of poor decisions are led by emotions and an inability to regulate those emotions to make an objective and logical decision. You're going to see that in business a lot, though. The businesses that make those emotional decisions, that's how they lead, is by emotional decisions. They usually don't last too long, right? Feels fun. Yeah, okay, this is great, but they don't last that long. You have to come at it with an objective perspective so that you can get a real, actual result in reality. Also, individuals and organizations, they're really going to seek comfort a lot of the time and comfort driven solutions, and at the same time ignore consequential ramifications. So that again goes back to the motivators. Comfort driven solutions, they feel good, plain and simple. They're not painful, they don't hurt, it's not difficult. It's like, oh yeah, this feels good, let's roll with that. Well, what are the potential consequential ramifications of that looking long term? Oh, this leads to it feeling good and everything's great now, but later on, it compromises our ability to survive or to compete. Okay, well, maybe you shouldn't do that, right? But it takes sound judgment in order to see that and understand that, and then have the decision-making ability to say, I'm not going to do that short-term thing because it costs me. It's a liability. So instead, I'm going to make the long-term play. That also takes maturity, which, as I said before about a lot of these things for sound judgment, takes experience or guidance, either one. Decisions are commonly evaluated based on how they feel in the present rather than what they ultimately produce. I say that because it's an interesting thing. Someone can look at down the line, because before we were talking about how they may not have looked down the line or can't see, and therefore they can't judge what they need to do. But then sometimes people can see it. They can see this is going to lead to a bad decision, but they do it anyways. It's what I mentioned. It's when it's based in emotion. They choose based on how they feel in that present moment rather than the actual result that they're going to get. Most of the time, and you've heard me talk about it before, this is because of people not having the ability to regulate their emotions, right? They can't tolerate discomfort. So they're going to choose the quickest thing or the easiest thing that's going to feel good. It's actually a natural human tendency, but it's also problematic when it comes to making decisions that produce a result. So let's talk about some of the consequences that'll come out of this. So obviously, poor decision making, right? And they'll make repeated avoidable mistakes that lead to unintended consequences that in turn usually create new problems. So people, it's like, oh man, why would you do that? That's a horrible idea. Why would you do that? Well, they haven't developed the sound judgment to be able to say, hey, that's a poor idea. Maybe I shouldn't do that. Instead, they'll make that mistake and they'll make it again and they'll make it again. And you'll see all of these consequences across different areas. That's the thing, because it's an integrated system, which is what we're talking about for this. It's system thinking. They don't see how that one decision has all of these different problems spouting out from that, like a spider web, affecting all these things. So even when they make a short-term decision that they thought was a good thing because it temporarily solved one symptom, they didn't realize that they created a bunch of new problems from that. So you can see how it would spiral from one small decision of poor judgment leads to multiple problems. Another consequence is increased vulnerability within both humans and organizations and even systems. So this would apply through all levels, whether it's a person, whether it's a business or institute, or whether it's society or a country. You're not resilient anymore. You can't stand through certain things, tolerate that discomfort, and deal with the problems that may come up. You need to be able to deal with adversity and the things that come up that make you struggle. You need to be able to push through that. Also, short-term gains followed by long-term decline. This produces reduced adaptation and capability and a reduced ability to compete. If you are looking again for those short-term wins and you then get a long-term loss, you can't compete. You're out of the game. It's crucial that you balance those. Notice that I'm not saying just do long-term. You actually need to do both. Do your short-term to make sure that the situation or the tactics within your current environment are taken care of, but at the same time, assess and account for the strategic long-term approach, because that's going to give you that long-term results along with long-term viability. So let's break down some of these foundations and how to use them to actually develop sound judgment. And as I said before, experience is the best teacher of judgment. You learn, oh, I did that and that didn't work. I probably shouldn't do that again. Doing that repeatedly over years or decades allows you to develop that judgment. Now, say that you're trying to fast track it and get something a bit more quick. Mentorship. Mentorship is simply borrowing someone else's experience to then apply within your own life. Right? So regardless, it's going to come from experience. There's a secret. Sound judgment comes from experience. But borrowing someone else's experience is often faster because you don't have to live through it. But it requires something that a lot of people today have a hard time dealing with: humility. Understanding that you don't know everything. You may not be good in this area. You may need to ask someone else, and you may need to approach them with no ego. That's a tough one, because a lot of people can get to the point where they're like, yeah, I don't know everything. I need to ask this person for help, but they can't approach them with humility to actually learn something. It requires that. Another piece of the solution is develop systems thinking, right? By understanding how different variables interact and how they influence each other. Constantly try to see what connects these. How are they related? How do they influence each other? How do they interact? Look at that through everything. And one of the best ways to do that is to look at nature. It is completely connected. A lot of people think, oh, you got an animal, you got a plant, you got some rocks. Okay, that's just what it is. No. They all work together. Whether it's starting from the plant, growing from a seed, animal, eating the actual plant, and then they end up getting eaten by a predator, and that predator ends up dying, and then they feed essentially the decomposers, which then breaks down the animal or the meat down into nutrients, which go into the soil, which then the plants take up, and it starts all over again. It's a system. Everything within life is systems. So when you understand the underlying why, the patterns, then you're able to predict, hey, this is what is most likely going to happen. This is judgment. And then as far as good decision making, it's your ability to impact that in reality. Based on what I know of how these things interact and where it most likely is going to go, this is what I should do to get the result that I want. That's what you're seeing when you're seeing a lot of high level, either strategic decisions or even founders or CEOs within business. That's what they're doing. They're looking at the interconnected situation of their organization, their product, their audience. How do we make it so that we get this result? Well, you have to understand it well enough first to get that result. Another one that you could do is evaluate decisions through second order effects and nonstop asking, and then what? Why? What next? Keep going until you can't ask it anymore. One thing that you're going to see is that it's multiple layers deep. You may look at one decision and see that it has this outcome that then leads to this outcome that then leads to this outcome. It's, like I said, a spider web. The more that you do that allows you to start recognizing and seeing the possible effects of an action that you may take. And you can consider that and make a better decision from your improved judgment. Another part of it for how you can develop that sound judgment is to learn to identify the incentives or the motivators driving behavior. rather than just relying on what they said or their stated intentions. Try to understand the underneath, like, hey, okay, this person did this and they said that they did because this, but that doesn't make any sense. So what would actually lead you to do that? What you're going to find is that a lot of human actions and behaviors are motivated by emotion. This isn't new news, right? That makes sense. However, things that usually would require a logical approach or logical decision making, especially strategic, you're going to find that when that actually should have happened with that approach, it was still made with emotions. This is super common when people just enter business or build their own brand and they don't have a lot of experience within their industry or within that field. And they're still making emotional decisions like there were in every other area of their life applied to business. That doesn't work out well. That's why so many businesses fail. A lot of people don't talk so much about that. A lot of businesses fail because of emotion. Emotion is not bad, but it has its place. Dealing with business or pushing forward within your brand, you need to have a strategic approach. Why? Because you're competing with so many people. It's not just you out there doing your thing. It'll feel like that as you're doing it if you're focusing on just that moment. But the reality is you're going up against tons of other people who are doing the same, trying to get the same result in the same market and possibly with more funds and money than you have. So you need to have that strategic approach to give you that competitive advantage. Another thing that people who are new in business may not actually realize or have experience with is learning that they need to accept certain trade-offs for every single decision. Sometimes there's going to be a loss. You need to make a decision to do this one move and it's going to cost you this, and this. And you're like, oh, I don't want to do any of that, but it's the best option. All right. So not everything's free. Things usually cost. You have to use your sound judgment to decide which cost is acceptable given this situation and these variables. It's a difficult thing to do, but you get better at it the more that you do it in life. Lastly, evaluate choices through their long-term consequences rather than just their immediate outcomes. Basically, start thinking long-term, big picture. How is this going to affect things? What does this look like? What's the underlying drivers for this? How does it produce a result in reality, regardless of my emotions and all of these other immediate things? Got to start thinking from that big picture. It requires practice to be able to do that. Not everyone has that skill. And I will say that some people have the skill more than other people, naturally. And other people have to develop it. Either way, you should be working on it so you can get better at it, regardless of your current skill level within that. So let's wrap this up. Better judgment begins with seeing reality more accurately, anticipating consequences, and acting accordingly. The same goes for survival in general. Our ancestors who couldn't see reality clearly were naturally selected out of the gene pool. So it has significant advantages. The problem is that sometimes it doesn't feel good. It requires work. It requires experience. It requires going through pain and having the patience to learn something, but it's still crucial. It's necessary, as I just said, not just for your brand, your business, your own life, but your survival in general. Every decision exists within a larger system. And they produce consequences beyond the immediate situation, what we talked about. Those who understand the motivators, the trade-offs, and the long-term consequences make fewer mistakes. They're making smarter moves. And in an increasingly complex world, judgment may become one of the most valuable competitive advantages that an individual or business can possess. Take the time to develop it. This is GI here on another Advisor Insight lecture. If you want more insights like this, go to gigriffin.com.